military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition. We have a roundtable today to really answer a lot of different questions. We're going to look at some of the legal issues. We're going to look at some economic issues and financial issues, and I think you will really appreciate the conversation. If there is a theme that runs through, especially this first hour, it is that we're going to cover some things that the mainstream press either has ignored or inaccurately covered. I could say falsely, but we'll leave it at that. And we have in studio with us, as we always do, Kelly Shackelford of First Liberty. And Kelly, lots to talk about today.
Oh, yeah. It's been a busy week.
It certainly has. We'll get into some of that. And also bringing back to the microphone, individual's been with us many times before, Jerry Tuma, who is a certified financial planner, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. Might mention, too, that we're going to be talking about some of these economic issues, so that means that material on this program is really kind of intended for more informational and certainly specific investment, tax, or legal advice. You would want to contact him directly or your financial planner. But let me just say, if nothing else, Jerry, we've got a lot of economic issues to talk about as well.
Lots of them, boy. Things are changing, and I will say for the better.
And we'll talk about how the stock market has improved dramatically. And just a little bit later, we're going to talk about if you would want to give a stock gift to Point of View or Focus on the Family, your church, or First Liberty, or whatever. We're going to talk about how to think that through, because since it's appreciated stock, there are ways where you can give the maximum benefit to the ministry and also reduce your tax liability. And so those are some issues that we're going to talk about. And so those of you that maybe have never really thought about giving a stock gift, especially since the stock market has done so well, we want to give you some advice in that regard as well. So we have Kelly Shackelford, Jerry Tuma. First of all, Kelly, one of the things that I want to talk about that you really probably wouldn't hear too much in the mainstream press, but it's this article here, a record number of judges confirmed in the first year. And you've had a chance to know some of these individuals. I saw a picture of you actually watching a vote on one of those individuals. And we have a link to First Liberty, which is an interactive map to find out where the federal court vacancies are. So explain that for just a few minutes, if you might.
Well, I think if you ask the average, well, I know because I saw the polling before the election, the number one, and after the election, the group that obviously voted in the largest numbers for Trump were evangelicals. It was 81%. And the number one issue of why they did that wasn't even close. It was judges.
Yes.
And everybody's focused on Gorsuch, and which is very important. But, you know, the 70 cases or so make it to the Supreme Court out of maybe 1 million. So all the other cases are ending with the other judges below. And what a lot of people, it's certainly not being talked about a lot, but a lot of people don't know about is there's basically about 160 judicial seats to this point now being filled by the president. And he's appointed 60. And this is despite the fact that the Senate is, the Democrats in the Senate are trying, they're using the 30-hour rule. They're trying everything in their and that they can to just slow everything down, to bog everything down. They object even when they don't object. And even people who Obama appointed that Trump is reappointing, they're objecting to them too.
Yeah, that amazed me.
Yeah, it's just delay. But despite all that, yesterday, President Trump did something that has not been done ever in the history of the country, which is 12 federal court of appeals nominees have now been confirmed by the Senate to the United States Supreme Court, despite all these blockades. Mm-hmm. And the last two were, friends of mine, people that I know very well. Mm-hmm. Jim Ho was number 12.
Right.
I actually think Jim Ho will be on the U.S. Supreme Court.
I think he might too.
He's brilliant. He will never budge off the Constitution. He was a clerk for Justice Thomas, and it's incredible to see that if you really want to do something, you can do it in the Senate. With all the failures, and it seems like they don't pass anything, this is definitely something that they could do, that they could control. And McConnell obviously knew this was very important, and so they have now set a record: 12 federal court of appeals nominees. I think they've got 6 others through, and there's a whole pipeline full of really excellent judges that will hopefully make it on the court. And it'll be interesting. I think next year some of this blockading will stop because the Democrats have, I think there's 35 seats up, and I think only 10 of them are Republican. The others are all Democrat seats that are up. So all the Republicans have to do next year is say, oh, you want to do this 30-hour waiting rule? We'll just stay in session until we get it all done. So they wouldn't be able to campaign. They would, So I think this is going to stop eventually, just because they'll force it to stop. But at this point, even with all the obstruction, they've done something that's never been done before. So they're really doing a focus and a prioritizing on getting the judges done and doing it well.
If you like sports, you always like to know how you broke the record. And it turns out in this case, the record was 11 circuit court judges that were actually confirmed under John F. Kennedy. So I'm old enough around the table to remember that. Time. And then Richard Nixon. So both of them were able to get 11 circuit court judges through in their first year. And Donald Trump has 12. And I think that's going to be it, don't you think? But again, another name that you mentioned just in passing, James Ho. It's H-O. Remember that name. I suspect someday we may be talking about him as a Supreme Court nominee. So we'll see how that plays out.
I think so, too. And Don Willett was the day before.
Yes, Don Willett. We know him from the Texas area.
They call him the Tweeter laureate. He's a judge who has a Twitter account that he's very clever and has done an excellent job with his Twitter account, to make sure he's elected every year.
Sure.
Since in Texas, as a Supreme Court justice, you're elected, but he has now been appointed and confirmed, and he will be on the Federal Court of Appeals as well. So these are people who are really solid, people who, are committed to the Constitution and doing things the right way, not taking the law in their own hands, going, well, I think I know how I want this to turn out. No, these are judges who restrain themselves and who don't make up things that aren't in the Constitution and apply the things that are in the Constitution. I think they're going to be great, and they're going to be there a long time. These are young, really pretty young people. They're probably going to be there for 30 years, 3 decades. So this is something that this president has done. This is going to go way beyond this president when you look at all of these seats that are being filled across the country.
Jerry Tuma, one of the things we've said before is elections have consequences. And when you think about people that have worked with Kelly Shackelford and other people that are friends of Kelly Shackelford that will now be on the federal judiciary, that's a really, if you will, kind of almost a opportunity to learn about how indeed these elections are really important.
Really is. I just kind of on a first blush, because I don't keep up with the political stuff the way you guys do and the judges. But when Trump was first elected, the very first show I did on our weekend, Smart Money edition was, I thought he had the potential to change the country for 40 years. And that's really what it looks like with these judicial appointments, because we know the liberals have had kind of a stranglehold on a lot of our country for many, many years with their evolutionary biases and all their extreme humanism and stuff like that. And thankfully, a lot of that, I think, is getting ready to go away.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back. And one of the articles we posted is one by Cal Thomas, Trump's Accomplishments Obscured by Distractions. And first of all, you probably haven't heard too much about the federal judges. You just did. We're going to talk a little bit about the booming economy and what that might mean.
Imagine that. Yeah.
So we'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Although we usually sing the carol Joy to the World during the Christmas season, the hymn isn't really about the incarnation of Jesus. Isaac Watts wrote it and has often been known as the father of English hymnology. He composed Joy to the World in 1719, and it was originally titled The Messiah's Coming and Kingdom. The original title illustrates why there are no references to angels, shepherds, or wise men. It's really about Christ's second coming. Now, that doesn't mean we can't sing about the coming of Christ as King during the Christmas season, since his first coming foretells his second coming. Now, the hymn is actually a paraphrase of Psalm 98. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth, break forth into joyous song and sing praise. He then answers why. For he, the Lord, comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the people with equity. Psalm 98 was originally a song of rejoicing for the Lord's protection of his chosen people. Isaac Watts used it as a New Testament expression of praise. Remember what the angels said to the shepherds. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy. The hymn proclaims that the earth should receive her king and every heart should prepare him room. That has not happened yet, but there will be a time when, as the hymn says, the Savior reigns. No more let sins and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow far as the cursed is found. Because of the fall, we now have thorns and thistles, but in the new heaven and earth, the curse will be gone. Christ will also come as judge and ruler. The hymn proclaims that he rules the world with truth and grace and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness and wonders of his love. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford with us, Jerry Tuma as well. Might just mention, Jerry Tuma mentioned a minute ago his radio program. We'll get into some of the economic issues in a minute. But, Kelly, under your picture, we have a link to the Federal Court Vacancies Interactive Map. And this is an opportunity for our listeners. We broadcast in 40 different states. So, again, you can find out what's happening in your state with your two senators and what kind of vacancies at the district court level and the circuit court level. So talk about how they can use that map.
Yeah, we have we're keeping track of all the federal judicial seats that are open. And so, you know, if you had any curiosity or wanted to know, you could go to firstliberty.org. I know you have it right on yours at pointofview.net, where they under my picture. But you can go there, and it's a map of the United States. You can click on your state, and it'll do two things for you. Number one, it'll show you the vacancies, the federal district court and court of appeals vacancies, so you can see what kind of vacancies these are, district court or court of appeals. And then it will also have the picture and name and phone number of your two senators for you to be able to contact them as well. Because this is just the beginning. I mean, there are 160 seats so far, and that's just going to grow. And we're only at 18 confirmed. So now a bunch of them are now in the. It took a while. You had to start. You had to get them. You had to get them nominated. You had to get them before the Judiciary Committee. You had to get them voted out of the Judiciary Committee. I mean, it takes a while, right? So, but the system is now, and the pipelines are full, and they're moving, and so we're going to see a lot of this as we get into next year.
Well, these are the kind of people that you would love to have on the courts, people that have been proposed by the Federalist Society, by the various American Heritage Foundation, and groups like that, as well as your own group behind the scenes. And you think of what a difference this would be if indeed you had Hillary Clinton as president and people like Eric Holder were in those court cases and deciding some of those cases. Well, this will help you for religious liberty for decades. Well,
yeah. For instance, on Wednesday, I was sitting in the Judiciary Committee watching one of my employees, who was being considered to be a federal judge for life.
Who's a pretty smart individual, too.
Yeah, he did an excellent job.
Oh, my goodness, is he bright.
And came under attack because basically he had traditional Christian views, which anybody who has those kind of views is going to be attacked. But, it was fun to watch. The Lord definitely protected him. He did an excellent job. But those kind of people, I look at this, even, Republican, Democrat, none of that. I definitely there's a huge difference between a Democrat and a Republican and who they put on the bench. But even a Republican, a normal Republican, let's say a Bush, okay, a lot of these appointments are going to be, well, this is my brother's friend, or this is, one of the donors, so-and-so, or this is, that's not what Trump is doing. He's kind of said, I know this is really important and to the base. And so I'm going to go to the people in the base who actually focus on this. And, Federal Society and Heritage Foundation and groups like First Liberty and us who care about and are in the courts day in and day out and know who the good attorneys are and everything. And so the people going onto the court are not political buddies or whatever. These are some of the brightest and youngest. They're going to be there for 30, 35 years. They are going to be, the type of people that could serve on the highest courts in the land. And they're being filled in all these seats. Yes. I mean, it's not just one or two. I mean, it's all of them. If you look at the people in the pipeline, you're like, oh, my gosh, these are all rock stars. These are all the best. Instead of, we got 1 out of 2, we'll take that, And that's what it would be in the past. That's not what's happening here. And I think this is sort of the untold story that the base, certainly of Trump's base, would be very, very thrilled about, because the courts is probably one of the most important things to them, because the courts have taken a lot of these issues out of the hands of the people inappropriately. The Constitution doesn't cover everything. And if it doesn't cover it, it leaves it for the people to debate and the states to decide and even to try different things in different states and figure out, that's sort of what federalism was all about. Well, a lot of those issues, because as judges think, well, I'll just do what I want to do, which is not the conservative judicial way, right. You start to take these issues off the table, whether it's abortion or all these other. I think we're heading towards a time when these issues are going to be out of the courts and in the hands of the people.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean the battle's over. It means that now, state by state, people are going to actually have to debate these issues and discuss these issues, and we're going to decide what we think is right or wrong, which we still could decide some really wrong things, but at least it won't be taken out of our hands and decided by 5 know-it-alls in the Supreme Court that are meeting in a back room and not accountable to the people. That's not how it was supposed to be.
So again, the theme that's kind of running through the first hour here are just some of these accomplishments that you haven't heard a great deal about. And that brings me to the second article that we've posted here by Cal Thomas, and he calls it Trump's Accomplishments Obscured by Distractions. I want to come to Jerry Tuma for just a minute, because he says there are all sorts of things that just have not been covered by the press. We understand that. But he says the economy is a good one. From anemic growth in the previous administration, it's now growing at 3%, which economists say is ideal. Stock market continues to set records, fattening retirement portfolios. Another one real quickly, unemployment at the lowest level since 2000 and a 17-year low for African Americans. It's also dropped for all other major racial and ethnic groups, and the black community, he says, is unlikely to give the president much credit because they oftentimes vote Democratic. But when we look at this, and maybe one more real quickly, we've been told, Jerry Tuma, that, these manufacturing jobs are gone. Guess what? The White House claims 159,000 manufacturing jobs have been created since the president took office. This is economic news that, if the press were really honest, they would be putting in the headlines, but they're not. So that's why we're talking about it today. What's going on?
Of course not. No, the media it's a disinformation campaign. Those of us old enough to remember the old Soviet Union, they'd send their propaganda out, try to disguise the real truth. That's what the media does right now. And they do a good job of it. But that's why we need shows like this to cut through that and give the real truth, unvarnished truth, wherever it may lay. Yeah, the economy is really perking up a lot. Part of it is right now everybody's kind of hoping, and the stock market's reacting to this year, tax reform and deregulation. The regulations just got ridiculous. In our industry, being a financial advisor, good grief, they pass so much stuff. The Dodd-Frank bill, for example, which is on banks, not on the type of things that I do as an investment advisor, That was far worse than Obamacare. And what most people don't realize is it tied the hands of the banks. We've had a complete shift in how the banks actually operate. A lot of things that they used to do have had to go to the non-bank sector in terms of loans, especially for small and mid-sized companies. So the Democrats, in their inimitable wisdom, came along and said, we're going to punish big Wall Street banks and blah, blah, blah. Well, mostly they punish the small banks and the medium-sized banks that don't have reams of lawyers and CPAs. Matter of fact, one unintended consequence of this, General Electric, now you'd think of them as a bank, right? No, they had a lending portfolio that was 50% of their overall gross revenue. They completely sold that whole division off because of the Dodd-Frank bill, because the president of the firm said we had to hire 1,700 compliance officers just to try to comply with this new law. It involved 10 different federal agencies. It's still only about two-thirds of the way passed through the bills and all the regulations that flow out of that almost 10 years later. It's silliness. It's ridiculous. You know, regulation is the way to life and life abundantly, according to, you know, the Democrats, which, of course, is stupid. Don't accuse them of being dumb. Just say you have stupid ideas, and you'll get there. But the bottom line is the economy is proving that Trump does matter. The right principles matter. The stock market's hitting new highs, obviously, almost every day, it seems like, and that's on the promise of those two things. So, when Trump got in office, I said the three most important things are, number one, probably the Supreme Court, because that's going to rule us for decades. Number two is the economy. Number three is the schools, which, of course, Cal Thomas talked about in here, going to breaking the liberal monopoly on everything that we believe in the humanistic one-world government type mindset in the school systems is huge, especially if we can get that through the minority community. So bottom line is everything he's doing right now, as much opposition as he's getting, he's doing the right things economically speaking. Even the trade deal. Even, Economist magazine, which I read, which ticks me off sometimes because they tend liberal on some of their views, especially morally, said, hey, he's going to destroy the world because of trade. Well, no, he had a $250 billion deal with China where we renegotiated our deal with China and made him play fair. That's the bottom line, is fair trade. So right now, I give him an AAA plus, 3-4 pluses behind that on the economy. He's doing a great job.
We're going to take a break, but let me just mention this article by Cal Thomas that we've posted here today. If you want some of these facts and figures, maybe you might even want to post this on your Facebook page and get some people recognizing that when we look at unemployment at its lowest level since 2000, the economy booming, and as you mentioned just a minute ago, if you add up all the trade deals, China, Vietnam, South Korea, $270 billion of benefit to American companies. And we haven't even talked about the tax reform bill or some of the other regulations. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And because the economy is doing so well, maybe you have money in the stock market. And we want to suggest a little bit later that if you want to help a ministry like Point of View or Focus on the Family or First Liberty, we're going to talk about how to give an appreciated stock gift that would help you and them. We'll talk about that right after this.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about legal issues. We've been talking about economic and financial issues. And let me just mention this article by Cal Thomas, Trump's Accomplishments Obscured by Distractions. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about Guy Benson's piece, Propaganda Works. A majority of Americans believe that the tax bill, that tax reform bill, will actually raise their taxes. And he says they're wrong. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But, you know, one of the things, Jerry, that we notice is with the stocks doing so well, there are some people that might say, well, I might want to actually cash in my stock and then give to a ministry. That's not the best way to go. As a matter of fact, we would say you would, especially with appreciated stock, would be better to actually donate the stock to a ministry, like Point of View, for example. We have forms for that, or First Liberty, or whatever it might be. And then the advantage of that is that then you don't have to pay taxes on capital gains. You get the full amount in your taxes for your write-off, and the ministry gets the benefit as well. And it's just amazing that that exists. And I think most people that might want to give a stock gift have never really understood that that is the better way to actually benefit you and the ministry.
Absolutely, Kerby, because as was said a moment ago, get to have your cake and eat it too, Kelly said. The issue is you can donate and get the full market value of the stock. So some people have owned stock for years. They may have inherited stock. Like I was mentioning, one of my clients who's now 92, her dad had the ExxonMobil, gave it to her. I think her cost basis on it's like 30 cents or something like that. So the issue is what you're able to do is you're able to get the entire write-off of the full market value. So if it's $10,000, if it's $100,000, whatever you donate, you get to write that whole thing off, but you don't have to pay the taxes on it. The ministry doesn't have to pay the taxes on it. Everybody gets more money except the IRS. And I know most of you you just need to write a check to the IRS to pay off the national debt, right? No, it's not going to happen. So the point of it is you do get to sort of have your cake and eat it too. It's the best way to be a steward of your giving. And I understand, is there a matching pledge going on right now? Well,
that's the other thing we might mention. Kelly, you were here last week. We had Foster Freeze, and he said in light of 45 years of ministry, he put a match on the table of $45,000. You were here when he did that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was tremendous. So that's another way you can kind of, take advantage of a lot of different things here. But I've always thought if somebody would think about, let's say they own some stock, let's say, a couple hundred shares or whatever. Let's say it's worth $2,000 and it's gone up to $5,000. And now it's worth $5,000. Again, you got to hold it over a year. It has to be over a year that you held it.
1 year.
And let's say it's gone up that much. Well, you've got $3,000 of gain there that you're going to be taxed on. But you know what? If instead of giving $5,000 in cash, you give the stock, you get the full $5,000 write-off, and you don't have to pay for that gain that you made, the $3,000. So it's kind of a win. It's a win-win for you. It's a glitch that's in the system that everybody knows is there, but it really is. If you don't use that method, if you have appreciated stock and you were to sell it, I mean, you're really, that doesn't make any sense. If you're going to be giving money, then you need to give the appreciated stock. If you're going, if you're not going to hold on.
The same thing with a mutual fund, for example. If you have a mutual fund that's appreciated over the years, a lot of people have mutual funds instead of individual stocks. Same story holds true. So you just have to hopefully keep good tax records over the years, so you know where how much your cost basis is. But really, you don't have to worry about that because the full market value gets deducted. You don't have to worry about all the dividends that have accumulated, whether you reinvested them, whether you reinvested the capital gains distributions over the years. You just get a full market value write-off for all of it, and don't worry about all the tax issues.
Yeah. Or you think about a stock given from an IRA or a 401k or something like that. They would have a penalty for early withdrawal if they're younger than 59 and a half years of age, but if they're over that, that's another thing. So there's just some real benefits. And one more is just the hassle. I'll tell my story. Before my mother died, she wanted to have us take some of these stock certificates. They were for utilities, PG&E, and use them for the kids' tuition. And so when it came time to cash them in, there wasn't a lot, but I think paid tuition one semester or so. after I did that, I go, oh, now what have I done to myself? Because I didn't know what the cost value was. There had been 2-to-1 splits, 3-to-2 splits, and all that. I go at H&R Block. They say, we can't calculate. I have to go hire an accountant. And I would have been better if I'd done it the other way around. The money I would have maybe given to church, instead give the stock to the church, and then use the cash for my kids' tuition. Right. It was kind of a double loss, because then I had to go hire an accountant just to kind of figure all of that out. And it would have been easier if I just donated that to the church and then used the money I would have given to the church to actually pay for my kids' tuition. So there are just a lot of reasons to think about this. And one of the reasons
not quite as good as the loaves and the fishes multiplying, but it's an additional multiplication of your giving.
So again, if you're thinking about a gift, especially at the end of year on stocks, when we had Jerry Tuma in here, we wanted to talk about that. And I know you've benefited at First Liberty. I know we have occasionally here. So just think about that. And if you want more information, let me give you that offline number. That's where you can talk to someone about the financial issues. That's a different 800 number. It's 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. That's also, of course, the number you can give if you just wanted to give a gift, because we have that $45,000 match that Foster Freeze provided as well. Well, one other piece of misinformation or disinformation has to do with the fact that the latest poll shows that 52% of Americans, Jerry, believe that the tax reform bill in Congress right now, that is now going through conference committee and all sorts of votes, would actually negatively impact their personal financial situation. And the bottom line is, first of all, let's recognize that 70% of the people that file taxes use a standard deduction. Mm-hmm. That standard deduction is going to double. So that right off the bat, you know that those people are going to benefit in some way. Right. And then you really are having trouble finding anybody who will do worse on this, unless you're talking about people that are making a lot, just weird, very, very wealthy people in high-tax blue states, because they're removing one of those deductions. So what do you do when a majority of the American people, a majority of the American voters, by the way, actually believe that a tax reform bill that will actually put more money in their pockets actually will cost them more? How do we deal with that?
Well, first thing you do is develop alternative sources of information and news, like this show Point of View, because that's the whole thing. The media either ignores stuff they don't want to know, they propagandize it, they just shift the truth. They have an alternate reality, kind of like Back to the Future Part 2 or whatever it was. There's a complete alternate reality, and it's the media's world. So if all you do is listen to the media, you're going to be living in the wrong world, 2/3 of the time. The issue is the tax bill is a good bill. Now, there's provisions in there I'm not really fond of. You know how the old story about how do you make sausage in legislation, they're going to have to add take and give and take. So somebody's going to get some special deal and somebody's not. The bottom line is that the only people that really, as you mentioned, are truly will be hurt by this somewhat would be the blue states. And frankly, I hate to say it, but it doesn't bother me that much, because, the high-end liberals that pay a lot of taxes, they want to pay more taxes, more power to them. But, there's going to be deduction or limitations on how much you conduct on your mortgage expense, but it's like $10,000 a year. There's also going to be, they're doing away with the state and federal exemption on, you don't pay tax on, that's not something you get to deduct off your tax return. Though those will affect people that make a whole lot of money in, the more liberal areas of the country primarily. The blue states take a little bit of it on the chin, but not too bad. Bottom line is that's going to force more people like Toyota to move to, Texas and places like that. So anyway, I'm born in Baylor Hospital in Dallas in 1955.
Kelly, what about this? Again, this misinformation. I mean, I'm always up for a good argument, but when a majority of Americans believe that their tax bill is going to go up, when there's very good evidence that it's going to go down for almost everybody listening right now, it's just amazing to me.
It is amazing. It's sad that people are that easily fooled, but it's also partly responsibility of the Republicans for not doing a good job of saying that's a lie.
Yes.
I've watched this attack over and over again, and I watched the response, and the response is like, I don't know, it's almost not a direct response a lot of times. It's like, well, this and this and this happens, and this and this and this happens, and instead of just, no, that's untrue. And anybody who understands this at all knows immediately it's untrue because of the doubling of the standard deduction. And the people we're talking about are not the people that are making, a lot of money. The people that are being fooled are the people that don't make much money at all. Well, their taxes are all going down. I mean, it's and that doesn't even bring into account the really, I think, and I bet Jerry's the same way, the really positive thing about the tax reform bill is not how it changes individuals' tax rates and all that. It's that we're finally, I mean, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And so companies and capital are fleeing our country. And we're about to change that if this passes, which means all of a sudden all that will begin to come back to the country, which will create a lot of economic opportunity in the United States, which will affect individuals. To me, that's the biggest real impact of the tax bill. But the idea that it's increasing people's taxes is not true unless you're very wealthy and live in like New York, California, Illinois.
That's for the sure. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about that corporate tax rate and also take some of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
States across the nation have been redirecting taxpayer dollars away from Planned Parenthood and toward health clinics that do not offer abortions. It's time for the federal government to do the same, and the U.S. Justice Department may now provide strong justification. Prompted by David DeLayden's investigations into Planned Parenthood's baby parts for profits transactions, 2 congressional committees have been looking into the activities of Planned Parenthood related to the sale of human body parts. Last year, a House panel released its report and made 15 criminal referrals against certain organizations, including Planned Parenthood, universities, and fetal tissue companies. Now, the Senate Judiciary Committee has released a report showing evidence that Planned Parenthood has indeed violated federal law in selling organs derived from babies they have aborted. The committee issued criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, and DOJ is taking this seriously. It's not illegal to provide body parts for research, but it is illegal to make a profit from selling them. Planned Parenthood charged and received payment from STEM Express and other companies that facilitate the transfer of body parts to research institutions. Planned Parenthood claimed the bulk of these charges were reimbursements for shipping costs. But the Senate Judiciary Committee found that STEM Express paid the shipping costs for these transactions. The committee has the receipts to prove it. The committee's report states that it found Planned Parenthood, quote, transferred tissue and body parts from aborted fetuses to firms for use in research by charging dollar amounts above their actual costs. The Department of Justice now has these receipts and has requested additional unredacted material from the Judiciary Committee's investigation. Now that DOJ is officially investigating Planned Parenthood for criminal activity, there's no reason for Congress to continue to send the organization $500 million annually. Congress should take the next opportunity to completely and permanently halt the flow of dollars to Planned Parenthood. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford with us, and if you just joined us, we talked about some of those federal court vacancies. Right now, we also have, of course, Jerry Tuma with us. He is the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services, and even though we'll be giving you some thoughts about everything, and especially the second hour when we get into the issue of bitcoins and investments and things like that, again, this is really intended for general information, but if you're interested in some of those questions and really wondering what to do right now with the stock market, and as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, if you wanted to give appreciated stock to this ministry or to other ministries, that would be a benefit. But Jerry, just before I went to the break, one of the things Kelly brought up is one I'd like to hear from you about, and that is changing the corporate tax rate from one of the highest in the world to one of the lower level ones. Each year I get to go to Hungary, and I saw what happened when they lowered the corporate tax rate in Hungary. You go to Ireland, and, you know, Ireland is doing real well. It's not the luck of the Irish, it's the
That's
lower
right.
corporate tax rate. What would happen if indeed this tax reform bill passes and we lower the tax rate to, say, 15 or 20%?
It'll create booms for decades. In other words, that doesn't mean you won't have a recession or you won't have a bear market. You'll still have those. But it's a restructuring of the economy. Now, Trump, we mentioned deregulation earlier. At this rate right now, the deregulation is happening. They're cutting regulations because he said, I want to cut 2 for every 1 you pass. Right now, he's on pace to cut regulations by at least 60%, and no one's done that since Ronald Reagan. So, number one, it's kind of like taking the handcuffs off the business community. You have to have some regulations, like you need a referee in a basketball game. But the liberals, again, their thinking is life gets better with more regulation, and they regulate people out of business, and they also cause extreme costs to everybody, and the tax is the same way. So their issue is, well, we raise tax rates because we got to punish the rich. Well, why do we need to punish the rich? I don't think we have to do that. So what happens is, and we mentioned this and talked about a lot in our book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond, which is still accurate, by the way, almost 10 years later, is we have to compete globally. So U.S. corporations have to compete against every other corporation out there. I mean, China is doing everything possible to get its companies to the top of the line. And so we need to do the same thing instead of making them run a race with a 50-pound bag of rocks on their back. Okay? Excuse me. But anyway, so one of these issues is the fact that we have the highest corporate tax rate or close to it of the developed world. It needs to go 15%. To me, I'd love it if it was at 10, but a good example used was Ireland. You know, John Goodman, Center for National Policy, went over there in the 1980s, talked to the Prime Minister of Ireland. He said, well, what do I do to fix the economy? The economy's in a mess. There are horrible conditions. You used to have, the IRA wars and all that kind of stuff. He said, well, lower your corporate tax rate. The Prime Minister said, wait a minute, or President. He said, if I lower the corporate tax rate, I'll have less tax revenue. The government will go bankrupt. He goes, no, if you lower the corporate tax rate, you'll have more tax revenue. And he proved it over time because what happened is they lowered the tax rate in Ireland to 15%.
15%.
You have this little bitty island over there compared to the rest of Western Europe. It's all hyper-liberal and overtaxed and overregulated, extreme socialism and all that kind of stuff. A few years before the bust, the last I heard, almost 50%, that's 50% of the foreign investment going into Western Europe was going into Ireland. Why? Because if you treat people nicely instead of hitting them on the head with a stick every time they come in the office to beat them, then maybe they'll stick around. Maybe they'll go, oh, this is kind of more fun. I think I'd rather pay tax at 15% than 50%, which is probably would have been at that time in France. So the issue is you have to develop competition. U.S. corporations have to compete against everybody else. So it's not a giveaway to the rich. What it does is it kind of levels the playing field, actually, and that will produce more jobs. It can help bring manufacturing back to the United States. And by the way, interestingly enough, the manufacturing that's coming back is primarily going to be in the red states because the unions have a lock. What kind of freedom is you have to be joining a union or you can't have a job? That's not freedom. That's not what our founding fathers talked about. So the issue here is really we got to free up the U.S. economy. The businessmen will do what's right. Yeah, you got to change the incentives a little bit, frankly, in some areas. I think there are areas where human greed takes over. But the bottom line is the corporate tax rate is the big deal on all the debates that are having on Capitol Hill about taxes, and that's the one that's going to set everybody free.
Kelly, let me come to another issue. We have trillions of dollars overseas that companies just leave overseas. They don't want to bring it back. Why?
Well, I mean, it's the same reason, right? I mean, why would they, when they can get a much more favorable tax structure to have that money somewhere else, why would they invest it here? I mean, if you can invest the money and make the money and your costs are double here what they are somewhere else, I mean, people are going to, not bring it back here. But that's part of Trump's whole goal. He's been very specific about bringing that money back because of the new tax structure. And that would make a big difference because now you've got all this money being invested in the United States, which will lead to a lot more jobs, a lot more success. I mean, I think that's already happened a little bit because I think money wasn't overseas, but I think money was on the sidelines in the United States. I talked to a lot of businessmen, for instance, just take one example that said, oh, yeah, I have, 48 employees. Well, what do you mean? Well, I could have a lot more, but then Obamacare kicks in.
As soon as I get to 50.
Yeah, and so literally businesses, they weren't picking up another Chick-fil-A franchise, which would have hired more people and done, why? Because of these stupid laws that, were keeping them back. Well, I knew that was going to happen immediately when Trump was elected. And so we've had the last quarter was, I think it was 3.3 GDP.
Right.
And that's even with the hurricanes and all this stuff that's been going on, we were at 3.3. This is huge. So that's just money that was already here that was on the sidelines. The more these regulations that get pulled back, the more the tax bill goes through. The thing that concerns me a little bit is I do kind of feel like they're going to have to pass this tax bill. They've got to.
Yeah.
But I'm getting worried because...
I'm worried too. That's one of our articles. That's our third article up there.
Well, people say, Marco Rubio is going to vote. I don't think Marco Rubio is going to vote against it. He would be insane. I mean, he would be vilified to the heavens. I mean, he'd be done.
Yeah.
I think he's playing to get what he can. But the thing that worries me is we've got two senators on the Republican side who are in the hospital.
Thad Cochran and John McCain.
And, you lose one of those, and then you got Corker doing his silliness, and all of a sudden you've got a problem.
Yes, we do.
And so I mean, it might be that, they could, if they're not careful, they could run out of time just because of the illness of two of the senators and these other people who are, messing around with things. So they do need to be careful, although, ultimately I believe they're going to pass it because they have to. Because if they don't, they know, there's going to be misery coming their way like they've never thought about.
There'll be blood on the streets. Yeah, for sure. Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's open up the phones and give you a chance to join our conversation, since we are privileged today to have not only, of course, Kelly Shackelford, but Jerry Tuma. I suspect some of you want to know, in this booming economy, what do I do? And we'll come back, and one of the articles we've posted is about Bitcoin. Some of you have asked, what about these cryptocurrencies? It's Bitcoin and Litecoin and Ethereum and all that. So we're going to get into that a little bit, and you might want to know about the stock market. Of course, as we mentioned, if you are thinking about giving a stock gift to any ministry, including Point of View, take the time to check out some of the material that we have for you, because if you're really considering making a gift from maybe an investment account or retirement account, let me encourage you not to sell the stock and give the proceeds. Instead, consider making a gift of the stock. And as we talked about just a few minutes ago, that's a real benefit for you and for the ministry as well. And so, again, as we mentioned just a minute ago, last Friday we had Foster Freeze on, and in honor of 45 years of broadcasting, Marlon Maddox started this program in 1972, 45 years, hard to believe. Nevertheless, he gave us a $45,000 matching challenge. That means your gift of $100 becomes $200, a gift of $500 becomes $1,000. If you have a stock gift of $5,000, that'd be $10,000. Just amazing how could possibly benefit us and the ministry and you as well. So all sorts of information on the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to talk to someone off air, that number is 800-347-5151. I'll give the on-air number when we come back from the break, but let's take a break. 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened to cross Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. We have in studio with us Kelly Shackelford with First Liberty. And if you weren't with us in the first hour, we talked a little bit about these federal court vacancies, and also just the fact that Donald Trump actually set a record number of judges confirmed in the first year, 12 federal appeals court judges, breaking the old record of 11 for John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. And so we also have that interactive map. It's available on that webpage, pointofview.net, or you can just go to First Liberty. Then we've talked a little bit about this article we've posted by Cal Thomas on Trump's accomplishments obscured by distractions. We talked about all sorts of things you're not hearing about until you listen to Point of View. Even talked about the issue of tax reform and a number of other issues. Might just mention Jerry Tuma, of course, is the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services, and we're going to talk a little bit about investing this hour. And as we do, we recognize that this is kind of general, so be careful. Don't take this as specific advice. You're obviously going to want to get specific investment tax or legal advice somewhere else, or even by contacting him. But, Jerry, one of the things I'm noticing, as we talked about in the first hour, is the stock market is really taking off. Now, a lot of people that say, should I ride it on the way up, or should I stay out? I know some people that a couple of years ago said, I'm going to just take everything and put it in cash, or I'm going to take everything and put it in gold. Again, give us an idea of how to think about this. I'm not asking for specific advice, but what should we be thinking about?
The general overview on the stock market, you kind of have to have two perspectives. So if you're younger in particular, you can think about the very long run. Okay, what's the 10 or 15-year outlook? And that's very positive, So I think, again, the issues of what Trump's doing in corporate tax reform, deregulating the economy, we're freeing things up. He was pointing to, could we ever get to 4% growth? And the answer is, yes, we could. If we can get us, the issue is I kind of talk about our corporations in America as if they're an Olympic runner and you put a big bag of rocks on their back, that's not going to help them. And that's what the excessive taxation and regulations have done to our economy. And, of course, it makes it more competitive. The reason they've got all this cash hoard offshore is because the current tax law allows them to not have to pay U.S. tax on that money if they've earned it overseas. So they don't invest it. They just sit there. So we're going to have a repatriation where these companies bring $2.5 trillion back to the United States. Now, a lot of the tech companies probably will buy back their own stock or dividends, but the other companies in particular can invest in more in the United States. So the more that we free up the U.S. economy from extreme regulation and extreme taxation, the more people are going to invest in the United States because it's a more attractive deal. At the end of the day, the CEOs of the corporations, not only do they have to worry about their own stock and their own stock options, they're accountable to the shareholders of that company. Their job is, I need to maximize the profit for the shareholders of this company. And you think of USA Inc., how do we get our economy growing again? Well, we do the right things. If you were a training Olympic runner, you want to give them the best nutrition and training and, all that kind of stuff you can, instead of punishing them and hitting them with, putting rocks in their bed and, putting straitjackets on them while they're trying to wrestle. That's basically what the liberals do, because they have at the core of them, they don't trust corporations. They don't trust business people. They think that they're all evil and they're out for greedy gain. And, of course, James chapter 4, I believe, or 5 has a saying about that in terms of the Bible, which says if you're greedy and you don't pay your workers and you're not fair and just, you're going to have some problems with the Lord in this life and the next life. So the issue is, there's always excesses, But capitalist system is the best system that's ever been devised by man. It's certainly better than socialism and communism, which have failed miserably as long as we've tried them for the last 100, 150 years. So if you're looking at the very long term, I think the very long term is very bright. We're also getting the younger people, the millennials and stuff are coming into the economy. Demographics do make a big difference. They're going to start doing more spending, more jobs for them. And so we've got another population boom. Behind them is Gen Z, which is actually bigger. So you remember, Kerby, you and I have both talked about demographics in our books, about the baby boom generation driving the economy. The only downside to that right now is the baby boomers are getting older, and by 2029, they'll all be on Medicare. And that's not funded. So that's going to cause some issues in the next decade, but not now. If you're looking at the stock market more in the shorter term period of time, I think the things that I'm concerned about, and this is a good reason to give donated stock now. The reason is because the Federal Reserve, they keep on their present track. The media is talking more and more about the tax or the increase in interest rates, and that's an issue, but not a big one. The bigger issue, all the printing press that they did during the crisis, they got about $4 trillion in government bonds and mortgage-backed securities that they're going to kind of start bleeding into the economy. And the European Central Bank's going to stop there, so it's going to be a bit of a liquidity squeeze. I think we could have a mild recession in 2019-ish. But in other words, if you're a long-term thinker, I wouldn't be too worried about that. If you are older and you got a lot of money, then that's something you should put on your calendar. But the bottom line is, overall, I think we're setting a new pace for a new economy and a new America.
Kelly, you and I kind of look at this sometimes in terms of what it means politically, and next year is an off-year election, and you've got primaries and you have a general election, but if the economy is doing well, what does that might foretell?
Yeah, that's a big deal, and I think it's gonna be interesting because everybody's focusing on, Trump's likability and his favorability, and of course he was elected with probably the lowest favorability. So it already starts kind of really as an anomaly to me. He is, because almost everybody that voted for him even said, well, he wasn't my first choice. But I think the test is going to be, and I think he's already kind of shown the test, which is not, do people, I used to say people vote for who they like, not even necessarily who they think's going to, do the best job or is the best leader.
Right.
This last time, I think they had a hard time liking anybody. I think between Hillary and Trump, they just had a hard time. But I think they kind of put that aside and said, who do I think will do better for the country? And they felt like they needed a shakeup, that the Congress was all a inside deal and a racket, and everybody was just patting each other on the back and making sure they stayed there. And they elected Trump. And so I think if the things that he talked about, he was following through on, which he is, regulation, decreasing regulation, the economy, tax bill, and all these things, trying to do something about immigration, all those things. I think they're going to, I really think that it's not going to be, well, do I like him? It's going to be, you know what? Our economy's doing pretty well. I've got a job. My pay is going up. I think those are the things that are going to matter. And so I think that, because typically this election coming up would be the people who are out of power are angry because of what's happening, and then they have more energy, which brings more people to the polls, which means the congressional seats and everything kind of flip the other direction.
Usually about 25, so about a loss for whoever's the president, about 25 for his party.
But I think you've got
who knows?
Two things going on here. That's in the House.
Yes.
And I think the normal people who would do that would be Democrats who were in the manufacturing in Ohio and in Michigan, and these are the people that voted for Trump. So I think if they see the jobs coming up, manufacturing being brought back, trade deals being renegotiated, all this, I think that might mollify that number a little bit. It might bring it down. And on the Senate side, you've got this weird situation where you've got 35 seats, and I think only 10 of them that are up of the 35 are Republican. The rest are Democrats. So I think the Republicans have a huge advantage just in the numbers and the way it shakes out there.
Fascinating. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've been hearing about Bitcoins. I want to get Jerry Tuma's advice on that. We've posted an article. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Although we usually sing the carol Joy to the World during the Christmas season, the hymn isn't really about the incarnation of Jesus. Isaac Watts wrote it and has often been known as the father of English hymnology. He composed Joy to the World in 1719, and it was originally titled The Messiah's Coming and Kingdom. The original title illustrates why there are no references to angels, shepherds, or wise men. It's really about Christ's second coming. Now, that doesn't mean we can't sing about the coming of Christ as King during the Christmas season, since his first coming foretells his second coming. Now, the hymn is actually a paraphrase of Psalm 98. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth, break forth into joyous song and sing praise. He then answers why. For he, the Lord, comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world with righteousness and the people with equity. Psalm 98 was originally a song of rejoicing for the Lord's protection of his chosen people. Isaac Watts used it as a New Testament expression of praise. Remember what the angels said to the shepherds. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy. The hymn proclaims that the earth should receive her king and every heart should prepare him room. That has not happened yet, but there will be a time when, as the hymn says, the Savior reigns. No more let sins and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow far as the cursed is found. Because of the fall, we now have thorns and thistles, but in the new heaven and earth, the curse will be gone. Christ will also come as judge and ruler. The hymn proclaims that he rules the world with truth and grace and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness and wonders of his love. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we are privileged to have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford, who joins us so often, and Jerry Tuma, who's joined us at different times. And Jerry, I guess it's about time to get to this issue of Bitcoins. One of the articles I've posted comes from Investors Business Daily. Before you buy Bitcoin, read this. Now, I want to broaden it to recognize that you have a number of digital currencies. And for people that don't even know what a cryptocurrency is, what we're talking about is something that was created sort of outside the government, and it's a medium of exchange. Now, we had James Paris on months and months ago, and he said, something you might think about is, if you have $100, you might invest it in Bitcoin and just forget it, and if it does well, fine. If it isn't, it's no big deal, and some people sort of say, well, that's kind of like gambling. Well, when he said to do that, I don't think it was Bitcoin was $1,000. Now, the other day it was $17,000. Yeah. So you've had all sorts of people saying, "Whoa, okay, is this a boom and a bust? Is this a real investment?" It gets into blockchains and all sorts of stuff. But help us kind of think through that, because we've had some callers say, "Okay, I did what you suggested. I invested $100 or even $500 in Bitcoin, and now what do I do? Do I just take it out? What do I think about all this?"
Well, first of all, we got to recognize what it is, and I'm not going to go into great depth. Matter of fact, I don't even know all the technology. The quote blockchain technology is way over my head technologically, but the bottom line is they've created sort of an alternative currency outside the control of any government, and that's the big deal on it. And what I think is two things are going on. Number one, it's raw speculation at this point. It is absolutely going to be a bubble. It is a bubble already, in what we call a bubble or a mania. And if you will, a mania is more or less the emotional fervor that's going on. So if you remember, I don't know if you've seen, some of the old movies where somebody gets into the Amazon River and they get attacked by piranha, or a cow gets there and there's nothing but skeleton left in 60 seconds. It's that kind of fervor that goes on into this, and one guy tells another and tells another. The contagion effect takes over, and of course, when the media gets involved, then it goes nuts. Now Wall Street's getting involved; it'll probably go nuts even more.
You're talking about futures and stuff.
They're adding futures and options, which allow normal people, or the big institutions, can now participate, which they haven't been able to before. So on the one hand, I think there is something valid to this concept, because we talked about the fact that demographics make a big difference, and not the emerging markets, but the established economies like the United States, Europe, Japan, all fail to plan adequately, I'll put it that way, for their aging societies. And as the baby boom generation gets into that period of time, it's harder and harder to fund Social Security, Medicare, which are basically unfunded completely. It's a transfer directly from one to the other. So paper currencies, if you want to call them that, what are called fiat currency, which means basically the government says it's a currency because they say it is. There's nothing really backing it. We used to have gold backing our currency. We don't do that anymore. I think the Swiss still have partial backing. But the bottom line is you trust the government. Now, the issue is the governments, as they print more money, as they spend more than they take in, deficit spending, that leads ultimately to more printing press, which debauches your currency. So in the old days, Roman emperors or whoever, what they would do is, I need more money. I don't want to tax the people more. So they would take their coins, their gold or silver coins, and they would add copper to them, resmelt them, and now they got twice as much money as they had before. Voila. Nowadays, the Federal Reserve just gets on the computer and says, we need $4 trillion. $4 trillion. Tap, tap, tap. Computer key, prints it. So the issue is it allows for a alternative method of medium of exchange outside the control of any government. The bad side or downside to that is organized crime, money laundering, drugs, and so forth can use it also. It's not within the taxing. So anyway, that's too long of a history on the history of money. But the issue is I do believe there is a valid purpose for this, and it means something in the long run. So I know you and I are old enough to remember the dot-com mania.
Oh, yes.
I'll say everything that had dot-com behind it became an overnight sensation. Matter of fact, there was one, Jeremy Siegel, one of the better professors in the country, talked about it. It's called netj.com. Anything that had .com behind the name was absolutely the hottest stock on the world. This one was actually a holding company, is actually a shell company. And if you look at their 10Q filings with the SEC, it said this is a shell company. There's nothing outstanding that will, makes this a better shell company than any other shell company. Shell company has no operations. Matter of fact, they had never made a dime's worth of revenue. They had $185,000 of losses on the books. And they said, not only that, management will devote inconsequential amount of time to this corporation. So it's just a fabric, and yet it was worth $75 million at the top of the cycle in the dot-com era. Now, 98% of the companies that came out as dot-coms went away. The graveyard, all the Super Bowl, ads in the 2000 market were all dot-com companies that were disappeared in 2 years. But a handful of them came through. Amazon.com obviously came through, all the other Microsofts, all the technology, the winners came through. That's what I think is going to happen here. I think we got about another year, based on my study of how the history of these cycles go, where these cryptocurrencies are going to go, they've already gone straight up. I mean, 17,000 was the last reading I had.
17,000.
250 billion market value for Bitcoin, which is not a stock, which is equal to all but the very largest corporations in America. So this is huge. But what happens is this mania occurs. Everybody jumps into it, kind of like the piranha. The manic behavior hits. The bubble occurs, meaning it goes way beyond what it should be. And inevitably, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Inevitably, it crashes. There will be survivors. So I think there's something to this technology long term. But you better decide to get out. I don't know when. I think it's still too early. But right now, and my son's in this, I'm like, okay, you set your hair on fire. All you want with your risk. That's great. But the bottom line is it's a bubble, and it will crash at some point, and they all do. And they're following the amazing thing is it's following the exact historical patterns. What happens as you get toward the end, and we're not at the end yet, I don't think, you get toward the end, all the imitators come out. There are now 1,200 other alternative cryptocurrencies coming out. They're funding themselves through crowdsourcing, which is a great invention of our legislators. Wonderful. We're going to put more and more regulations on illegitimate financial advisors, and crowdfunding means you can open a website and collect money from investors you could be a crook. You can have organized crime behind these things. It doesn't make any difference. So these guys are funding. One guy, I thought it was crazy. He was actually quoted in Barron's, and what he said made common sense. He's running a $400 million cryptocurrency hedge fund. Guess how old he is? 28.
Yeah, I figured
he's 28 years old.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, how did that guy accumulate $400 million? It's craziness. It's probably going to have some more legs. Once Wall Street starts getting in it, where they're now creating futures contracts and options on it, which literally just started, they'll have an ETF before long. So on the one hand, I think it's got longer to run. On the other hand, once you get to what I would truly call the manic stage, which we're entering now, that usually means you have 9 months to a year before the collapse starts. And again, I think just buyer beware. I think it's going higher. I think long term it's legitimate. But in the short run, it's going to pump up way too high, and no telling how many crooks and robbers are out there trying to do this, where you just trade your Bitcoins in for their alternate currency and your money's gone. You'll never see it again.
You know, we can use the book of Ecclesiastes. First of all, there's nothing new under the sun, but there's also a biblical principle there of dividing and diversifying.
Yes.
Speak to that issue.
Yeah,
because
Ecclesiastes 11, Solomon said, divide your assets into 7, yes, 8, diversify, because you do not know what disaster might befall the land, and you don't know what's going to do better, this or that. So it's a diversification principle.
So you don't want all your money in gold. You don't want all your money in Bitcoin.
No.
You don't want all your money in stock, right? So talk about what that sounds
Diversify.
like or looks like.
Well, I mean, you know, different people need different types of portfolios depending on their age and their risk tolerance and their type of thing. But, you know, the most reliable right now, at least, is the U.S. stock market. I think that the outlook for stocks is very strong, although I think we could hit a bump in the road or worse around 2019 based on the current path of the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank and so forth, and maybe oil thrown in there. I think everything right now for the longer term looks good and healthy except for the bond market. We hit 5,000-year lows on interest rates in the last cycle in 2016. The bank credit analyst said that they tracked bond yields in Great Britain, 717 years of history. It's never been this low before or since. There are over $1 trillion, over $10 trillion in Europe of bonds that have negative interest rates. If you hold them until maturity, it is guaranteed you will lose money. That's never been invented until this crisis. So the bond market long-term, to me, is toast. The next move, we've hit the hinge point. Deflation is over. We talked about that in our book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond. We had the deflationary or ice phase, then the inflationary phase. There's an 800-year cycle that when you go through these giant credit crashes, what ends up happening is it eventually gets bailed out by the government because the banks are going broke. That creates ultimately a currency crisis and high rates of inflation, but there's a 15, 20-year lag time from one end to the other. And I think over the next at least 10 to 15 years, the next story is going to be about inflation. The things that will get killed the most are fixed income investments of almost any kind, unless they're tied to inflation, but especially the bond market.
Let's take a break, and if you want to ask some questions, you can. But when we come back, we also have some scandals surviving and surrounding the Justice Department, the FBI, the IRS, not to mention a few more harassment cases. So we've got a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Talked about some of the accomplishments under Donald Trump and how those have been obscured by distractions. And even last week we talked about moving the embassy, interestingly enough, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We posted an article the other day that talked about the influence of the evangelicals in that regard. So the theme that we've been running through for about 90 minutes are all the things that are positive that you haven't heard about. Before we end, I want to talk about some of the negatives that almost everybody else is talking about, and one of those has to do with something, Kelly, you and I have talked about before. Back when Eric Holder was head of the Justice Department, we already saw how it had become politicized. Well, now we're starting to see people calling for us to investigate the investigators, because we now know, not just in the Justice Department, but even in the FBI. We have, for example, the just revealed text from Peter Strozak, a top FBI intelligence agent who was the individual that did some of the interviews with Michael Flynn. Turns out he is so anti-Trump, it gets off the charts, and why he was let go by Robert Mueller is now coming to the fore. You have the Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe, and the fact that there was all sorts of money funneled to his wife when she ran for office in the state of Virginia. And going back even further, Kelly, let's also mention one more, and that's Lois Lerner at the Internal Revenue Service that has prevented, some of these 501c3 and 501c4 groups from getting their tax-exempt status. And you've worked with some of those individuals that were, again, dealing with a weaponized IRS, a weaponized FBI, a weaponized Department of Justice.
Yeah, I think this is really important. As you talk about, we talked about how things changed under the Obama administration in the Justice Department. There were always political appointees at the top at the Justice Department. That always happens. But it didn't matter who was at the top in the past. The career lawyers were going to do their job. And they understood that the rule of law is the rule of law. And so it didn't matter whether it was Bill Clinton, president, or George Bush, you were going to have that approach. That changed in the Obama administration. I mean, they literally would refuse to defend certain federal laws that they didn't like. And it began to really corrupt the whole process of the rule of law. And I think now we're seeing the same type of thing, not only within the DOJ, but, within the FBI happening at the same time. And I find this stuff this to me is very dangerous, because rule of law is something we kind of take for granted, but it's what separates us from Banana Republic. I mean, if you don't have that, then there's no peaceful transition of leadership. You transfer it to the leader that has the most weapons, and this is really dangerous. And I think what I am seeing in the FBI, and including in the Mueller investigation, and not the investigation itself, but the people that are involved, is it just stinks to high heaven. I mean, the idea that this guy, if you've seen his text, it includes things like that you're having this job in the FBI is an insurance policy in case Trump wins. That was some of the terminology used. The other was, I forget, it was he that said it or his mistress that said it to him, but I remember one of the things I read was that your job is to stop this menace, talking about Trump. And this is the guy that's investigating Trump. And this is the guy that, changed the investigation of Hillary Clinton. And now we find out that Comey originally had written down in his, before, by the way, he had done, he had even interviewed Hillary Clinton or anybody else. They had already determined that this was gross negligence, which would make criminal.
Yes, it would.
And yet that was changed after this, incredibly partisan individual within the FBI had interaction. So, and that's just the beginning. There's all these different people that are in here. I mean, one of the attorneys on the Mueller investigation team is somebody who represented the Clinton Foundation. I mean, that's just insane. And Bob Mueller has a very good reputation as being a fair person and all this. But I think right now, if he's got to do something, he has to clean house in some way. He has to, in some way, ensure the public that this isn't corrupt, because if he doesn't, whatever comes out will be dismissed by the general public. Most of the country right now thinks this whole thing smells to high heaven. I understand there's probably 40% that would, be anti-Trump no matter what the facts are, and they see things all in one way. But in this case, I've seen the different polling. It's 60% in some cases. It's definitely over 50% of the country thinks that this investigation is not fair, is not on the up and up, and that if that remains in place, then whatever they come up with is going to be dismissed, and the FBI and the whole agency is going to be dismissed as corrupt, and that is really dangerous. And so I think there's some real. I wish it wasn't the recusal for Sessions, because
Jeff
what
Sessions,
needs to happen is he needs to act. The new head of the FBI needs to act. Them sort of pretending like there's nothing wrong, which is what they've been doing, is not helpful. And somebody needs to take action. And there needs to be a lot of cleaning house and a lot of sort of making clear that even the appearance of impropriety is not allowed.
This original investigation was to see if there was any collusion between the Trump administration and Russia. And we even at the time said, this might end up being a boomerang and come back and hurt some individuals. And now we find out that that so-called Russian dossier, which was just completely made up, was actually coming from Fusion GPS. Well, that project analyst is Nellie Orr, was the wife of Bruce Orr, which was the Obama Justice Department Associate Deputy General. And he was the right-hand person of Sally Yates. You might remember her. She was the one that defied Trump. And so now you're starting to see all sorts of individuals that obviously are left-leaning, mostly Democratic, in the Justice Department, in the FBI, wherever it might be, that actually were part of this attempt to use this dossier, which was completely fictitious and was used to try to discount the possibility that Donald Trump could be elected president of the United States.
Yeah, look, there are plenty of attorneys out there who are very bright, who are very capable, who aren't partisan on either side, who aren't really into that. Why in the world, with the millions of attorneys who are out there, and even the lower number who are highly intelligent, highly qualified, etc., why would you choose people who have donated or maxed out to Hillary Clinton for president? That's stupid. I'm sorry, it's just stupid. And Mueller is smarter than that. And then this defense that, well, we think that people can put their partisan beliefs aside. Well, nobody believes that. No, you can't. You're a human being. And so that kind of, that's Washington speak that nobody else believes. And so when Rod Rosenstein this week testified and gave that kind of stuff, that just shows that you are not connected to what's going on in the country, and you have no idea. I mean, if I were his boss, I would fire him right now. I would say, you're going to destroy the FBI by this kind of not taking care of real problems. If you're a leader, you take care of problems. You don't sit around and pretend like they don't exist and let them fester and let them get worse. And that's what's happening right now. And the problem is he's doing that because his boss can't really do anything because he's recused himself. Yeah. And so the reality is Rod Rosenstein should recuse himself. Mueller should recuse himself. There's a whole bunch of people in there who really should recuse themselves that have conflicts of interest. So this thing stinks, and anybody who cares about the rule of law, about even appearances of impropriety, about proper ethics and respect and acting like a grown-up is very disappointed with what's going on, and it's not going to be acceptable. And I don't know what they think they're gaining by not dealing with this, because it's not going to go away. It's probably going to get worse. There's an investigation going on of the FBI itself. I mean, everybody has their own inspector general, and that's going on. I hear there's a lot of information that's going to come out. So there's even more. It's going to get worse, and so they might as well deal with it instead of pretending that there's no problem and that, oh, yeah, we always have people who are Democrat or Republican, but they put that aside in the investigation. Well, they're not tweeting and saying, you need to stay in this job as an insurance policy unless the president gets elected. And they're not saying you've got to take care of that menace. And meanwhile, they're working on the investigation.
And back to the point we made before, we're coming up to an election season again, as surprising as that is. And I do wonder if that just, again, plays in the hand of some candidates that say, You know, we started draining the swamp, but we really need to drain the swamp there in the Justice Department and the FBI.
There's no doubt. I mean, something has to be done, and I think everybody's kind of waiting for somebody to show some leadership, and we'll just see what happens. But right now, nobody's doing that.
Yeah. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll wind down some of the things we've talked about here today. We've talked about federal court vacancies. We've talked about some of the accomplishments this year economically, the tax reform bill. We talked a little bit about Bitcoins. And, of course, we also talked about if you wanted to give a gift of stock. We'll mention that one more time in case you didn't have a chance to hear that in the first hour. So a lot to cover. Jerry Tuma in studio, Kelly Shackelford. We have links to both of their websites, whether it's Cornerstone Financial Services or First Liberty Institute. You can find those all at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
States across the nation have been redirecting taxpayer dollars away from Planned Parenthood and toward health clinics that do not offer abortions. It's time for the federal government to do the same, and the U.S. Justice Department may now provide strong justification. Prompted by David DeLayden's investigations into Planned Parenthood's baby parts for profits transactions, 2 congressional committees have been looking into the activities of Planned Parenthood related to the sale of human body parts. Last year, a House panel released its report and made 15 criminal referrals against certain organizations, including Planned Parenthood, universities, and fetal tissue companies. Now, the Senate Judiciary Committee has released a report showing evidence that Planned Parenthood has indeed violated federal law in selling organs derived from babies they have aborted. The committee issued criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, and DOJ is taking this seriously. It's not illegal to provide body parts for research, but it is illegal to make a profit from selling them. Planned Parenthood charged and received payment from STEM Express and other companies that facilitate the transfer of body parts to research institutions. Planned Parenthood claimed the bulk of these charges were reimbursements for shipping costs. But the Senate Judiciary Committee found that STEM Express paid the shipping costs for these transactions. The committee has the receipts to prove it. The committee's report states that it found Planned Parenthood, quote, transferred tissue and body parts from aborted fetuses to firms for use in research by charging dollar amounts above their actual costs. The Department of Justice now has these receipts and has requested additional unredacted material from the Judiciary Committee's investigation. Now that DOJ is officially investigating Planned Parenthood for criminal activity, there's no reason for Congress to continue to send the organization $500 million annually. Congress should take the next opportunity to completely and permanently halt the flow of dollars to Planned Parenthood. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Kelly Shackelford, Jerry Tuma in our studio with us today. And I just thought I might mention that the next booklet we have coming out, we have one that is on Sharia law, one on politicized culture. And anybody that gives to Point of View at $45 a month, we send these automatically, is entitled Make Your Vote Count. And one of the reasons we wanted to have that available is we're going to be going into the election season. Kelly and I know all sorts of individuals that are running for office, and we've endorsed different ones and those kinds of things. In that little booklet that we're making available to those of you that are donors to our Truth Team, it takes you to the very good material that Kelly Shackelford has put together at First Liberty. in terms of what churches can do and what churches can't do. And the bottom line is they can do almost anything they want. There's only two things that pastors and churches can't do according to the IRS code. But it brings me back, Kelly, to a conversation we had yesterday with Stephen Mansfield. He's written a book dealing with Donald Trump and pointed out that one of the things that Donald Trump did early on that really got the attention of evangelicals was he talked about the Johnson Amendment, and that was passed on just a voice vote in 1954. The goal at that time was Senator Lyndon Johnson was trying to prevent H.L. Hunt and a number of other sort of anti-communist groups from running any kind of ads against him. But what it effectively did was tell churches you could lose your tax-exempt status if you ever spoke on political issues. And there's been an attempt, even in this tax reform bill, to try to withdraw and reverse the Johnson Amendment. It still exists, but the bottom line is that should not scare individuals from paying attention to who's running in office right now. Because the other day we had somebody call in and said, I didn't like the choices we had in the last election. My answer is, well, then get involved in the primaries, because that's where you can choose the best individuals that then can run in the general election, and you can get behind wholehearted supporting. So, again, there are very few things that churches and pastors can't do, and there are a lot of things that individual Christians can and should do if they're going to make a difference in this world.
Yeah, there's really very few. There's nothing that a church can't do that it wants to do. The only two things that it's supposedly not to do are things that churches would never want to do, and that is the church entity is not allowed to endorse one candidate over another. I've never met the church that wanted to say, hey, First Baptist Church of so-and-so wants to endorse so-and-so. Now, the pastor can endorse whoever they want. That's fine. It's just the 501c3 entity can endorse. So, Again, not a real issue. The other thing you can't do is the church entity cannot give money to one candidate over another. Again, show me the first church that says, hey, we want to open our coffers and give money to politicians. I don't see that very often, and I don't expect to see that very often. So those are the things. Now, what can churches do? Well, they can do all the things that they feel led and called to do biblically, which is, can they talk about the issues and what the Bible says about all the issues that people care? Absolutely. Can they say, here is the proper stance on these issues that are involved in our elections? Yes, they can. Can they make sure that people are registered to vote and have a voter registration drive? Sure they can. They can do that. Can they have voters' guides that lay out how, everybody who's running for the office, stands on those issues? Yes, they can. Those have been done for years. So can they invite the candidates to a race to come speak to their church? Sure. What if only one shows up? Well, did they invite both candidates or all the candidates in the race? Yeah. Doesn't matter who showed up. They can do all the things that a church would want to do, to be active, to stand on biblical principles, to try to make sure that they're picking people that are going to advocate those principles. The things they can't do are things that I've never seen churches want to do. So I would encourage people to be involved, not only because, everybody knows the Congress and the Senate is going to be up for grabs, right, in the next election. Is it going to stay Republican? Is it going to go Democrat and all that? But there are a lot of these local races. For instance, you gave the example of Texas. Texas, for instance, although it's very conservative and it's controlled, both the House and the Senate, by Republicans, the House was actually controlled by a speaker who was elected by the Democrats and then a handful of Republicans. Well, that speaker is now gone, and that's all about to change. And so there's all these people running in the local communities over whether you want to pick a conservative or somebody who's considered, a more liberal Republican or a moderate or whatever. And so that choice is being made in this election because the House is going to be totally different than it has been. So those local, and that type of thing is happening in every state around the country. So it's not just the presidency, which is not up this time. It's also not just the Senate and the House that you're looking at, but these local races matter as well. And that's a lot of times why you need a voter's guide, because you might have known on TV about the Congress or whatever, but you probably haven't heard a lot about that local state representative, and voters' guides give you the information of where they stand on those issues that you care about.
I might just mention, first of all, if you want to find out a little bit more about what churches can and can't do, we have a link to firstliberty.org, and you can find a very nice PDF that's a one-page and also some others, and a video that goes with that. And then we will also have some election resources up there so that we link you to every one of the family policy groups or other groups that we have. So that's the first thing. Jerry Tuma, we have you as well in studio with us today, and we have a link to cornerstonereport.com. And as we've talked about some of these investments in the stock market and Bitcoins and gold and just what's going on right now, if people wanted more specific advice, they can go to the website, cornerstonereport.com, but also you'll be glad to answer their questions off air, won't you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have an 800 number for our office, 800-327-4285, 1-800-327-4285. And, of course, there's a link. I do a weekend show, as you know, that's on
Smart Money.
Investing. Yeah, Smart Money on investing and mainly the economy and investing is the primary two topics. So,
and I might just mention earlier in the last hour, we did talk about that, because it's been such a great year in the stock market, whether you wanted to give a gift to this ministry or First Liberty or Focus on the Family or your church or whatever, think about this, because if indeed this is appreciated stock, you would be a lot better off if you were to donate the stock, not to sell it and then have to pay the capital gains. This is one of those real benefits in the tax, and maybe that, I hope that'll stay with the tax reform bill, because it's certainly been a way to help individuals. And if you'd like more information about a gift of stock to Point of View, again, that number that I've given you before is 800-347-5151. But that's something to pay attention to, because if nothing else, we recognize, Kelly, as we've talked before, I think for you said, didn't almost 30% of your income comes in the month of December, something like that?
Yeah, right at the end of the year, 30% is pretty common for a lot of ministries. And so really you look at your whole year and your plans that you set and everything, it's determined a lot by what happens in December. And especially, we say December, but it's always really the last week and a half,
last week
right?
and a half, yes it is.
And that's one of the reasons why I think it's good that you're mentioning the stock, because people have to, if they wait till the last day and then try to do a stock transfer,
yes.
that's probably not going to work. It's on a Sunday, number one, I think, the last day. So that's why it's good to think about it now. Go ahead and make plans to support the ministries that you want to support and kind of get that in motion.
And I hope you would support the radio stations that carry this program. I mean, some are commercial stations, so you might want to buy the products that they are advertising, but if they are certainly a nonprofit station, I hope that you will support them as well. We did want to close by what happened last week. Foster Free's with us, and after 45 years of broadcasting, he said, I'd like to put a $45,000 match challenge on, so that is still available at our website, pointofview.net. And so that means it will double your impact. And certainly if you wanted to make a charitable gift of a stock, we would count that against it as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. And if you'd like to know more about First Liberty or Cornerstone Financial, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Next week, we've got a full lineup of programs. We are going to be very, very busy, so I'm looking forward to some of those interviews coming up. So if you have a good weekend, I hope that you will join us starting on Monday all the way through Friday as we talk about these important issues next week on Point of View. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. Enjoy some football. See you back here on Monday.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.